Hello and welcome to Kurious City. My name is Letty and I'm one of the co-founders of Kurious Arts. This is a podcast all about encouraging people to get curious about what's going on creatively across the city. I will be talking to a collection of individuals and organisations and companies that are making an impact, and it's all about trying to encourage you to get off the sofa and get out into the world. Let's have a listen to who we're talking to today. Hello everyone, I'm delighted to say that I am in the studio today with multi-award winning author Helen Mort, who has been described by Carol Ann Duffy as one of the brightest stars in the sparkling new constellation of British poets. But not only is she a poet, she writes short stories, novels, drama, creative non-fiction. She's a mum, a stepmum, a senior lecturer at Manchester Met, a freelance mentor and facilitator. She also climbs, trail runs, and loves real ale. So, Helen, my first question is, do you ever go to sleep?
Actually, at the moment, not very much, because I've got a small child and
Alfie.
Sleep is very interrupted. But I've discovered that the good thing about broken sleep is that you have amazing, incredibly vivid dreams.
Oh.
Some of the strangest dreams that I've ever had with broken sleep. And so I keep meaning to keep a dream journal, because I keep thinking that there could be something productive to write about in there.
I was going to say, do you ever write about dreams? Do they inspire you?
In the past, I have a poem called Other People's Dreams, which is about the idea that, probably quite a strange idea, that every time you sort of crop up in someone else's dream, it's like a parallel life that sort of goes on without you. And I always think that now, if I have a dream about one of my friends, or like that they've got a parallel life.
It's really weird, isn't it, with dreams, when suddenly you dream about someone you haven't thought of, or even realised you remembered. You know, it's the brain's amazing, isn't it, in that respect?
And also working out how things from the day have fed into what it is. It's like the business of writing poems, because you're constantly kind of carrying things around with you and blending them together, and then they come out in a interesting image, or I think it's the same when you dream. It's processing things, isn't it?
The brain kind of filtering by itself overnight.
It's
quite exciting, really, isn't it?
Except that most of mine are just anxiety dreams anyway, so it's not that. It's not as creative as I'm making it sound.
No, more stressful.
Yes.
So, of all the genres, would you say that? I mean, you're most often associated with poetry. But you've recently written, 2019 was it? Your novel.
Yeah.
To critical acclaim. But are you comfortable with being most closely associated with poetry? Is that your sort of safety zone, would you say?
I think it is. I think it's always been my first love. It's the thing that I started doing when I was really small. So that was apart from writing stories at school, like everybody does. Do they still now? I don't know, maybe not.
But I really hope so.
But that was the art form that I gravitated to first. And I think it'll always be, when I have something that I want to say that feels really urgent, or really really difficult to articulate, I suppose, it's always poetry that I turn to. But in fact, I never particularly expected that I'd publish in any other form. It was still a bit of a surprise to me that I've managed to write a novel.
And how did that happen then?
I had this idea. I'd wanted to write something about female rock climbers for a long time, partly inspired by a great novel by the sci-fi writer M. John Harrison. He's not just a sci-fi writer, he's wonderful in all genres, about climbers, this really surreal, brilliant novel. And I wanted to write something that sort of was inspired by that, or paid homage to that. And then other things started creeping in, and I realised that I was writing about policing in Sheffield and the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster.
Gosh.
And before I knew it, I was just aware that the canvas was a bit too big for a poem, the narrative sort of canvas, and that poems, even a sequence of poems, probably wasn't the right form. And then my characters started
talking to you.
Yeah, authors talk about this a lot. I don't know if you have this. Your characters they
sort of tap on your shoulder and say, "Excuse me."
Yeah.
Is it my turn yet?
Absolutely. And you can't help but listen to them, can you? And then the story gathers its own momentum.
And so how long did it, I mean, you talk about impossible poems and the satisfaction of finishing an impossible poem. Like, how does the process of writing prose differ from writing poetry? Did you still have those same kind of impossible moments with writing the novel, or was it a very different thing for you?
I think I just have so much admiration for novelists and prose writers in general, because I found that I think with poetry you can rely on those moments of convergence or inspiration when you're running for the bus and these ideas you've been carrying around with you for ages crystallise, and then you scribble something on the back of the bus receipt, and then you take that away and develop it. So I've always found that poetry was something that I could fit into my life no matter what else was going on, sort of sporadically. But with a novel, it's not really like that, is it? You have to put in a shift, and you have to, if I left it for a long time, it was like having to get to know all the characters again.
There has to be that sort of continuity, I suppose, with the writing of a novel, and constantly, you can't just kind of put it down, like maybe you could a poem and then come back to it a few months later. Possibly.
Definitely, you have to, at least with the first drafts, you've got to have a bit of momentum and a bit of, and just the sheer volume of words. I mean, poems use a lot of white space, don't they? It's great. There's a lot of blank space around them. You're working with silence as well as with sound. And in a novel, that definitely wasn't the case. I also really struggled with dialogue. I think writing dialogue is not something that, perhaps that's not something that comes naturally to a poet, because you're not often using dialogue in your poems. It's sort of more dramatised, I guess. So I did find that really tough as well.
Did you kind of seek advice, or did you read other novelists to think, like, I wonder how do they do it? Or was there something that you did to try and help yourself through that?
The best breakthrough that I had was, it's often the way, isn't it? This is why it's so nice being part of a community of writers, because someone will say something to you that changes your outlook. So I'd sent some early drafts to my friend Joe Hakim, who lives in Hull, and he's a fantastic novelist. He just recently published a book called The Community, which I really recommend. And he was reading some of my novel at the same time as he was working on his, and I'll always remember him saying to me, don't forget that when characters say something, they're usually doing something at the same time. They're not just speaking; they're living, and you know they're fiddling with the glass, or they're
not
tucking a strand of hair
on what they're on the art of and the act of speaking.
Yeah, it's not happening in a vacuum. And when he said that, I found that just that practical bit of advice, it didn't just help me on that level in that I went back and had my characters doing more things while they were speaking, but it just made me. I suppose it made me imagine the dialogue in a more realistic way. So thanks, Joe.
Yes, tick. We'll all buy the book now.
Yeah.
So when you were writing the book, did you carry on writing poetry alongside it?
Yeah, I think my novel was sort of, I think you get this a lot, that you're working on different things, but they're sort of talking to each other as well. Yeah. So for instance, when I started it, I'd just been finishing off a book of poems that were about the history of women's mountaineering and sort of about women into sport more generally. And so I carried on with that, and I think that fed into part of the novel as well.
They sort of have a symbiotic relationship almost.
Yeah, I tend to find that poems are always there in the background, although I have had spells of feeling like I couldn't write poetry, and like we all do, I guess, worrying that it had gone away and that it was never going to come back, and that the muse had snuck off in the night. Yeah,
always terrifying.
It is, absolutely.
And I suppose part of the reason perhaps why your work, whatever the genre, communicates with each other, is this taking inspiration, which I think you put it beautifully, obviously. But the engine behind nearly all my work is Gritstone and Moor, suburbs and Edgeland. Mm-hmm. What is it about the peaks and Derbyshire and that kind of landscape? What do you think can you analyse why that inspires you, or what it is about it that makes you write about it or set your work there?
I was afraid that you might ask me that.
I'm so sorry.
I feel like I've spent a lifetime trying to work that out, but I sort of think that if I ever did work it out, maybe I'd stop writing about it.
Right, it's going to break the spell.
Yeah, there's some kind of it gives me a feeling. I get a feeling even when I'm just driving over to Sheffield from Stanage, Burbage on a sort of twilight evening.
There's nothing better.
Yeah,
isn't it?
you just
you feel it
in your body. And I guess for me, because I grew up not far from here, I was always going out to the peaks with my dad, and it's got that formative sort of, some people have a thing about the sea. They want to live near the sea. They find it inspiring. I'm not fussed about the sea. No. I'm not really fussed about any features of landscape except the ones that you find around here. And the closest I can come to putting my finger on what it does is just that I always find that those long kind of gritstone edges are really great for getting a sense of perspective on your life, quite literally, because you're up and you're sort of looking down and you can see Sheffield or you can see Manchester, and
kind of it grounds you almost, but in geographically as well as sort of being there with the elements.
They just always feel like good thinking spaces, and so I've got that thing of needing to go out onto an edge if I want to think. So for whatever reason, that's become my sort of imaginative landscape. Sometimes I think I should try writing about somewhere else, but then I think, well, it's endlessly fascinating, and people come here throughout the year because of that, and I can never sort of puzzle it out. Yeah,
Brincliffe Edge is a particular favourite.
Yeah.
Have you written about that place which you describe again beautifully? It feels like a tunnel of rusty light in the autumn.
Yeah.
Is there a specific poem about that secret part of Sheffield?
I haven't written a poem about it, although I wrote about running through those woods with a head torch early in the morning. And I know you're a runner too, so you get that, that feeling of complete solitude that you can get if you go out early in the morning or late at night, when you can kid yourself that there's nobody else around.
Yeah.
And I get that especially if I run there. So I haven't written that many poems about it, but I wrote in my novel, I had these little bits where places, different places in the city and in the Peak District sort of talked and told the story a bit. And there is one in the voice of Brincliffe Edge, right. Because my partner read it and said, "Oh, I think you're describing my garden there." He liked the idea that the garden in our house had found its way into the book, and I said I wasn't actually thinking of our garden at all. It was a different one. But yeah.
One of the things I ask people to do is talk us through a kind of day in the life of, and yours, because you're a stepmom and a mum, so there's lots of working around the mum duties, but also it struck me as being incredibly wholesome. So it's obviously breakfasts and games and books and nursery and different working once that's happened, and then park, tea time, bar time, bed. Were you always so good?
I've probably made that sound a lot, but like...
Oh no, you do mention possibly having some wine at the end.
There's some wine always, yeah.
Good.
Some, well, not always, but and some tantrums and some screaming. I think you do that, don't you, when you try and impose an order onto your life by thinking about it like that. And I guess actually no day's ever the same, and there's always people coming and going, and our house is quite sort of active and busy. There's often teenagers there, and there's lots of friends dropping in, and I'm actually quite a what's the word, introverted person. I can go out and talk to people, but then I'm very tired and I need time to recover, so I'm not great at being in a house that's busy.
Right.
So
do you think that's why you love spending time outdoors and that kind of solitude it brings?
And obviously with a young child, you can't do that as well. You can, but you feel a lot more housebound a lot of the time. So I put all my savings into building a shed in the garden where I could go and I could write, and that's become the place that
sanctuary.
that I go. Even when there's no one in the house, it's
really?
like going to work. It's my.
I think that probably a good psychological thing to have that place that is specifically for your work. Would you say what impact has motherhood had on your process or your work, if any?
Well, for ages it just meant I wasn't writing anything at all, and I was worried that it would never come back again and that I'd changed forever, because it's such an emotional upheaval as well, and you do feel like a different person. And I also thought I'd probably never write about it, because there's been so many amazing collections of poems and albums and novels about motherhood recently. I just thought, I've got nothing to add to that. I don't have, and yet it has crept in.
And because you're currently working on a non-fiction book about motherhood and mountains. It's ended up. It's been surprising, and it's given me. This probably sounds a bit grandiose, but it's really restored my faith in the idea that if you are an artist of any kind, you will turn whatever's happening in your life into art. Going back to what you were asking before about the sort of daily routine thing and trying to be good and sort of follow a schedule, I found it really inspiring recently reading this book called Daily Rituals. And it's I've read that. Is it to do with all the different ways that writers approach their work? So we've got Patricia Highsmith, who just lies on her bed and has a quarter bottle of vodka and loads of donuts. And then in contrast with Stephen King, who has to write, George Saunders, who writes for 8 hours a day, every day, no matter what. And that, it is reassuring, isn't it, that everyone has their own thing.
And that whatever you do, it's probably okay. The one that I read, I think it may be the sequel even to that, this one's only women, and a lot of them were parents.
Okay.
And I found that encouraging, because you had everything from women who barely saw their children after they were born because they needed to devote all this time to their art, to women who were basically at home doing all the housework, looking after the kids all the time, and then fitting things in. And as you say, it just goes to show that everything comes out all right in the end, and everyone finds their own pattern. And the worst thing you can do, I think, is just constantly compare yourself to other people and worry about what you're doing, because what works for one person just won't work for anyone else. Though in answer to your sort of initial question about the thing about being good, I think I do have that. I'm an only child, and so I think I grew up with a sense of having to do the right thing and always get my homework done, and I was really, really boring at school and really geeky, and I think I've still got that element of wanting to do everything.
Served you very well, trying to do it all right.
Yeah, that's exactly. Which can be bad if you give yourself too much of a hard time.
Absolutely. But you had success really quite, it's a career-defining moment for you when you won the Foyle Young Poets of the Year award when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Oh, it was amazing. It's such a great competition. It still runs now. Anyone, I think, between 11 and 18 can enter it. So if there's anybody listening who falls into that category, writes poems, I'd really encourage you to enter, because I just sort of sent off this poem on a bit of a whim, really, not thinking it would come to anything. And
what was the poem?
Oh, it was really bad. It was about a peach stone, about how it looks a bit like a brain.
I think it's lovely. It does look a bit like a brain.
Well, but I think it was a little bit teenagey, angsty, dark thoughts, sort of. It was a bit heavy-handed.
Right.
But some kind person must have seen something in it, some kind of
potential.
Spark.
Yeah.
And it was just really kind of affirming for me, because I went from small town Chesterfield and my school, where I got teased for working hard and for reading books and stuff, and I went on this writing course for a week where I met other people who thought it was normal to want to read loads of poetry books and so
must have been such a relief.
Yeah, you just suddenly feel like you're not as weird as you thought you were.
Yeah.
And now that I've been a poet for a while, I realise no, I am as weird as I thought I was. It's just that all poets are a little bit like that too. But that's great.
I think because you say it gave you a sense of validation and legitimacy almost, to kind of think, yeah, it's okay to be doing this and I'm allowed to write, or I'm good enough. So I'm really interested in what you think about competitions in general, because obviously they can be life-changing and amazing, and they can offer opportunity and showcase it. But if you know, perhaps if you never win something like that, I mean, do you think that has an adverse effect or stops people? It doesn't provide that sense of legitimacy that would keep them going.
Yeah, and I do think rejection is just still one of the hardest things that you have to deal with, isn't it? It's just, you know, in life, but especially in writing or in art. I think I've learned quite a lot from judging competitions that might be helpful to people who are entering them and perhaps not feeling like they're having much success. Because being on the other side of it and being the judge has made me realise how incredibly subjective it is.
Absolutely,
and people always tell you that, but I didn't feel like I knew that until I did it. And I was aware of the time pressure that I was under, the very partial way that I was encountering. And all judges do their best, and they give as much of themselves as they can to the process and to giving the work a fair hearing. But at the end of the day, it'll always come down to lots of things converging, lots of chances, you know, what kind of mood they're in on that day, what they're interested in at the time, what stands out, what order they read things in. There are a million and one different factors that can sort of get in the way. So I think the important thing is to be resilient and keep believing in what you do and keep trying until you find the places that do recognise it. And maybe it's not competitions, because there's always a zeitgeist or whatever, isn't there? There's always something, and you might be a genius who just happens to not
might
fit
do
in.
a Van Gogh.
Exactly.
That'd only be realised afterwards. Yeah.
I always want to do a poetry workshop, a critical workshop, where I take some famous but unusual poems by respected authors along and treat them the way people treat poems in workshops. And, you know, they'd be going, well, I'm not sure about the ending. It's a bit OTT if they thought about putting that. What a brilliant idea. It just shows you that genius poems can break rules, and that maybe if they got entered to a competition, they wouldn't have been selected. So, yeah.
And you state one of the hardest things about what you do is doing battle with self-doubt. And I think that's something that so many creatives across all genres can identify with. I know that I do. So have you got how do you deal with those moments, and have you got any tips for it?
I wish I had some good ones. I think it's a work in progress for everyone, isn't it? I'm quite lucky. I think everybody has what I'd call a sort of emotional metabolism, like a physical metabolism, how they process different things. So, for example...
Gosh, what a lovely concept.
It might be complete nonsense, but I have quite a fast one. So if something happens that upsets me, I'll get really worked up, and I'll spend about a day moping and feeling upset and angry and
it consumes you,
critical, and just really. And then the next day I'm fine, and I go back out there and sort of carry on. So I think I'm quite lucky in that way.
Resilience.
I've maybe got used to it, but if you have a slower sort of metabolism with things like that, it might be really difficult to. But I think you just have to. You have to be kind to yourself, easier said than done. And you have to, obviously it gets more difficult, doesn't it, after you publish, because you then, whenever you sit down to write, it's not you and the blank page anymore. You've got this little editor on your shoulder going, that's no good. So I suppose I have learned to switch that off just for the initial writing process, and tell myself that I've only sent the editor out of the room. I haven't killed them or anything. They can come back in later and be useful, but they're not going to be that useful now. I've got to...
I don't need them now, so thanks, but out you go.
And also, I think there's something really valuable in allowing yourself to be rubbish every now and then, and not being afraid of failed experiments. I mean,
really
I'm
good
as
advice.
guilty as anyone of doing the thing where, say, if you like a musician and then they make this album that's completely different and you go,
what's
no,
this?
I don't like that, go back to what you used to do. But I recognise that they probably need to do that in order to change as an artist.
Yeah, and grow and develop and all of those things.
Yeah, so we've all got to let ourselves do that. And it's a long game, isn't it? It's a long sort of process.
Yeah. There's no rush. I think that's something that we should all remember. There's no rush. But the resilience, do you think that might be something that you have inherited from your beloved grandma?
My gran's great. She's so she looked after me a lot when I was a baby after my mum went back to work. And so I've always been really close to her, and my step-granddad as well, who's not with us anymore. But yeah, I don't think I've ever met anyone quite as tough and
It's that
good-humoured.
That grit that you talk about, the landscape and that strength. I think possibly is she a personification of that Peak District. I'm going off on a tangent here. But yeah, the way that you talk about her is lovely. The sharpest, funniest, toughest person I know.
She really is. I mean, I think all the women in my family like that have got such a lot of admiration for my mum and for my gran and for my great grandma. I was really lucky because when I was little, we had there was me, my mum, and then next door there was my grandma and my great grandma. So
amazing.
We had these like 4 generations of quite strong-willed women all living in the same.
You're going to have to write that unless you've done it already.
I often regret that I didn't. This is it, isn't it? The writer in you goes back and thinks, why wasn't I making notes when I was 7?
Should have taken notes.
But yeah.
Where does the writing come from? Is it are you a creative bunch generally, or are you a bit of an anomaly on that front?
So my mum, I'm really grateful to her for sort of, I suppose, gifting me that. My mum was a primary school teacher, and she was especially like teaching English and reading and creative stuff. And she just spent so much time with me when I was little, reading, exposing me to different forms of literature. She was tireless and amazing, and now as a mum myself, I'm just realising how tiring that must have been and how much it must have taken out of her alongside everything else she was trying to do. So she gave me a lot of opportunities that you can't take for granted, I think.
Yeah.
And has always supported me. So I think a lot of it comes from her. My uncle's a writer on my dad's side, a really great short story writer and poet, and my dad also loves poetry, and he used to introduce me to stuff. So I think I definitely come from a family of readers, some writers as well, and storytellers, I guess, like a lot of us do. I think everyone's family has a really great storytelling tradition, if you can.
Yeah. Mum and I have got this philosophy that every single family has an incident. Like we've got in our family the boot room incident that no one really talks about. It was a very bad time. It was actually involved my brother and my uncle, half uncle, so they were sort of the same age. But it was a ski trip, and they went out and hit the tequila, and then the next morning we all came down, and they had projectile vomited all over the boot room, so we all had to go and get new boots. So for obvious reasons we don't talk about that, but every family has an incident, and it's that sort of story, that passing down of hopefully not terrible stories in everyone else's case, but
and they get more exaggerated.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
I'm sure in the telling of that story the amount of sick has got more and more
massive. Yes, it's just waves. Anyway, let's move away from sick. Canada. What makes you happy? And one of the things you've said is Canada.
Yeah.
What's your relationship to Canada?
I haven't really got. I just really like it. I went there first in maybe 2012. I went to Vancouver, and I thought it was just one of the most amazing cities.
Yeah.
Have you ever been?
Yes. Yeah, I haven't been to Vancouver.
It's just. I think Canada's all like that, but Vancouver's just beautiful. And then I developed a relationship with the writing centre, the arts centre in Banff in the Rockies, the Banff Arts Centre, which is an amazing institution and supports so much good work. And I went there to do a mountain and wilderness writing programme. Imagine
right up
that.
Your street.
Yeah, if you couldn't have made a more perfect sort of course for me to do. And my second poetry collection came from the beginnings there, and then I've been lucky enough to go back quite a lot since as a judge or as a guest at the festival, and so
amazing.
It's become a bit of a
second home.
Yeah, and the mountains are it's just it has a draw for me in the way that the Peak District does.
Yeah.
Though if you asked me to choose, I'd still always pick here.
I'm proud to hear it.
I'd spend a lifetime exploring here.
Good. I think I would too. It's just, anyway. I ask people to do some shout outs to other creatives and organisations in the city. And you've mentioned your very good friend, Rachel Bauer, who set up First Matters.
She is amazing. I always think if you ask me to name just an impressive, lovely person, it would always be Rachel, because she manages to be so kind and so generous and such a great friend, but also do all these inspiring things as well, like setting up First Matters. We worked on a book together called First Matters, which published new work by various writers from Sheffield and outside. And she's also an amazing academic and a very talented writer, and and she does all that and looks after 3 kids, and I just think, gosh,
how do you do?
I wish I wish I had like even a little amount of her energy and compassion. But there's so much good stuff happening in Sheffield at the moment. First Matters obviously has been wonderful, but there's one
that I'm actually doing my first ever spoken word performance at First Matters, because I've heard so many good things about what a supportive and amazing safe space it is to have a bash at something.
That's fantastic. When is that happening? Is it soon?
It's happening on Thursday.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Oh, good luck.
Thank you.
It is a really great place to and I think every city needs more places like that.
And also every city, something that you've brought up here, more national events to happen in Sheffield instead of London.
Yeah.
How do we do it as a city? Like, how do we... Because it doesn't make sense to me. I've spent the past 10 years living in London, and obviously London's great for many things, but nothing would make me go back there now, having lived back in Sheffield for 2 years. But, we're right in the centre of the UK. Mm-hmm. We've got the beautiful Peak District. We've got so much diverse and eclectic creative talent, and yet we're usually going either to Manchester or Leeds or London or Newcastle, or what do we do to say, no, everyone, come here?
I think we just keep doing what we're doing and maybe shout about it a bit more, because as you say, it's a city with so much going for it, and I think things are changing. So,
I do too. There's a buzz, isn't there?
There is a buzz, and there's also I know that there's been quite a lot of BBC programmes that have been recorded in Sheffield recently. People have come there, and just the more you start, this is a very small thing, but if I do anything for the radio now, I mean, actually, it's mainly a practical consideration because I can't leave my baby that easily or often. But if I'm asked to go and do something for radio, I always ask if I can record it from BBC Sheffield via a sort of link, and they're pretty willing to do that. So I think that sense that you can put where you live on the map is definitely... But I mean, still, even in the poetry world, I remember interviewing for a job with a poetry magazine, and my idea, I didn't really have many ideas, I don't think, but one of my ideas was to take more of the events outside London and sort of tour around, and there wasn't that much enthusiasm for it, I remember at the time. And so yeah, I think
It's
things are
beginning to
changing,
happen.
but it's slow. I mean, you see what's happened with Dockfest and
I know,
the
it's incredible, isn't
takeover
it?
of the
We need
city
more
that
of that, don't we?
happens. Yeah, I think it's coming.
We're working on it here as well.
Yeah, well, of course. I
Doing,
think
trying.
having things like this space and having
Yeah.
Kurious Arts here and having commune sort of upstairs, that's part of the shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And obviously Kelham Island's had a bit of an impact.
Yeah.
Voted. Isn't it like the trendiest place to live in the whole of the UK or something?
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Big tick for us.
Very big tick.
Right. I just want to ask, if people want to find out more about you and your work, or if they want to be mentored by you or just find out anything, where do they go?
They could go to my website. I've got a website which is www.helenmort.com, imaginatively named.
Well, it's clear, it's succinct,
It does
what
the
it
job.
says. Yeah, good.
I also use Twitter, which is just at Helen Mort, and Instagram, Morty but nice.
Smashing.
Which is a really silly name.
It's absolutely lovely.
But also, yeah, I work for Manchester Metropolitan University, so you can find me on their staff pages. And yeah, I'm
Brilliant.
usually quite friendly.
I can second that.
I'm quite friendly if I've had my coffee in the morning. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
before that, less so. But yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Oh, thank you. It's been
really
great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
A Kurious Arts production.